определенные ограничения, как вы знаете, но я думаю, они нам сегодня не помешают в нашей работе. У нас серьезное представительство. Я хотел бы поприветствовать всех вас, и в частности советника по культуре посольства Нидерландов в Российской Федерации, господина Верейзера, первого секретаря посольства России в Нидерландах, госпожу Гридину, и нашего коллегу, нидерландского журналиста-исследователя, директора фонда «Советское поле славы», господина Рейдинга. Мы очень благодарны всем вам за участие сегодня, и я думаю, Российский государственный гуманитарный университет, наши коллеги, в первую очередь директор учебно-научного центра изучения стран Бенилюкса Мария Николаевна Пушкова, тоже будут очень рады доложить о результатах нашей совместной работы. Мария Николаевна, я вас приветствую особо. Благодарю за ту огромную работу, которую ведет ваш замечательный центр в составе Российского государственного гуманитарного университета уже на протяжении целого ряда лет. Королевство Нидерландов в годы Второй мировой войны взаимодействие с российскими подразделениями, участие российских советских граждан в движении сопротивления в Западной Европе – это не закрытая тема для нас. Это тема, которая исследуется, и исследуется очень скрупулезно на протяжении целого ряда лет и в Советском Союзе, и в Российской Федерации. Но очень важно сегодня подчеркнуть, что она находится в центре внимания наших студентов, когда мы преподаем всеобщую историю Второй мировой войны, то есть в центре учебного процесса, здесь, в России, в системе высшего образования и в системе образования в целом. Это действительно не пустые слова. У нас, у российских студентов, огромный интерес к страницам Второй мировой войны, в частности, к тому, что происходило на территории Западной Европы, Северной Европы в годы Второй мировой войны, Великой Отечественной войны. И работа, которую мы здесь осуществляем в рамках нашего центра по изучению стран Бенилюкса, она не уходит куда-то в небытие или в некий личный архив, отнюдь. Она активно используется в учебном процессе. Нам очень интересно знать, как страны Бенилюкса, их граждане вместе с нашими гражданами, которые бежали из германского плена и присоединились к партизанским соединениям Нидерландов, Бельгии, сражались плечом к плечу в годы Второй мировой войны против нацизма. Вот только вчера, готовясь к сегодняшней встрече, я в своем архиве обнаружил очень интересный документ. Документ этот, газетный материал, называется «Русские в Орденах». Вот, «Русские в Орденах». Это независимое военное обозрение 2015 года. А материал касается, в частности, партизанских соединений на территории Бельгии, чем мы вот с Марией Николаевной занимаемся последние месяцы. Но здесь серьезные очень переклички и с государством соседним, с королевством Нидерландов, о чем мы сегодня, конечно, будем говорить и более подробно. Это 2015 год, то есть это неумирающая память. Мы возвращаемся к этому не только от юбилея к юбилею, но этот материал находится на письменном столе у студентов в соответствующих учебно-методических материалах постоянно. И мы прекрасно помним, как сегодня формируется память, коллективная память граждан Российской Федерации, граждан Западной Европы, память, которая сохраняет наше прошлое периода Второй мировой войны 1939-1945 годов. И, конечно, в общих курсах истории Российской Федерации, всеобщей истории, для нас очень важно важен такой раздел, как исторический опыт. Исторический опыт, который сегодня исследуется на исторических факультетах, архивоведческом факультете, в Российском государственном гуманитарном университете, он опирается и на работу наших учебно-научных центров, на работу таких людей, как Мария Николаевна Пушкова, ее коллеги в рамках этого центра, которые, ну, действительно служат высокой науке и выступают сегодня замечательными партнерами наших нидерландских коллег, которые сегодня вместе с нами и вот организовали эту замечательную международную конференцию. Я еще раз, дорогие друзья, всех вас приветствую. Я думаю, что мы сегодня очень плодотворно поработаем. Здоровья вам и благополучия. Благодарю за внимание. Мария Николаевна, вы тогда смодерируете дальнейшее движение, хорошо? Слышите меня?
Спасибо. Да,
благодарю
спасибо.
вас еще раз. Спасибо.
Спасибо. Dear friends, dear colleagues, dear students, today is our second conference. The first one was in May and was dedicated to resistance in Belgium. Our conference today is dedicated to the Netherlands in the Second World War. And yes, we meet each other in this online, not offline, but online, but it's our reality. So I think we shall speak about our past, but we have also our present and we have our future. So I think it's very important for us that we share not only our past, but we share our present, and we will share our future. And because we have very many in common, and today we have everyone has one problem, it's Corona crisis. So we unite our efforts as in the Second World War II, and we shall win this problem also. So I will give the word to our Vice-Rector for International Cooperation, to Verivana Zabotkina.
Very much. Dear Mrs. Jana, Ms. Beat Reiser, dear Mr. Remke Rading, and dear colleagues, dear students, it's a pleasure and privilege to welcome you here today. And I must say that the center that Pskova is heading is one of the most active centers at our university. As she mentioned, in May, we had a very nice, very important conference devoted to the historical memory. And it was Russia, Belgium, 75 years of victory. And what is important is after that conference, involved, during the conference, after involved Российский центр Россотрудничества, in this Россотрудничество, Vera Bunin organized a special meeting between the young people of Belgium and Russia. And I do hope that today's conference will initiate another meeting, but this time it will be close cooperation and discussion between the young people of the Kingdom of Netherlands and Russia. And of course, our thanks to Professor Remke Rading, who is doing his best to maintain the memory of the Soviet soldiers, Soviet officers. And what is more important, it's not only preservation of the memory, but he's doing so much to find the relatives, the living relatives of those just Soviet officers and soldiers. Итак, я хочу приветствовать всех присутствующих, поблагодарить господина Ремка Рейдинга за его потрясающую работу как директора фонда «Советское поле славы». И самое важное, что он не только сохраняет память о погибших, но он пытается восстановить их имена и восстановить связь с потомками, то есть вот та самая связь с настоящим, прошлое и настоящее. И, конечно, так же, как конференция в Бельгии у нас завершилась или продолжалось в виде форума молодежи Бельгии и России, и хотел надеяться. То, о чем говорил ректор Безбородов, воплотил. Он говорил о том, что студенты непосредственно вовлечены в этот процесс. И важно, чтобы студенты российские и студенты нидерландские могли обсуждать важные, очень нужные исторической памяти. И, конечно, советское поле славы – это, так сказать, очень важный аспект вот, деятельности такой российско-голландской. Мне кажется, нам будет очень интересно послушать также Ирину Гридину, которая расскажет о деятельности посольства России в Нидерландах по сохранению и поддержанию единственного, подчеркиваю, единственного в Нидерландах советского военного захоронения. То есть, поистине, то, чем мы сегодня занимаемся, это акт научной дипломатии. This is a science diplomacy act. And Mr. Remke Rading is the key science diplomat. And of course, everybody present today are young science diplomats. So I wish you success. And I'd like to thank Maria once again. Thank you so much, Maria, for initiating this very, very important event. And I wish everybody success. And the last but not the least, the великий российский ученый, филолог Бахтин сказал как-то: диалог – это не только консенсус. Диалог может быть мнений, но только в диалоге находится истина. Вот я желаю, чтобы сегодняшний диалог помог нам найти больше истины о российско-голландских связях и о той памяти, которую мы храним. Dialogue is not always consensus. Dialogue is sometimes clash of opinions, but it's only dialogue that the truth is found. That was Bakhtin, and I wish everybody a successful dialogue today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vervana. Thank you very much for supporting our activities. You're a big friend of our center, so it's very nice that you participate in our conference. And now we open our conference, and I give the word to Mrs. Janet Verrijzer, and we shall speak about the Netherlands in the Second World War.
Thank you very much. Let me put up my PowerPoint presentation. So here you are. I hope you can see it.
Not yet.
Can you see it now?
You may try once again, I guess. So turn off the presentation and then turn it on again, please.
Yeah, I'll try again.
Yes.
The green button. Second try.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak today, and thanks to the rector and the vice rector for their friendly words. I am a doctor historisch now myself, so I am convinced that history is important for the present as well. And the Second World War that we're discussing today is a period in European history that was very important for the whole of the continent until today. My presentation will tell you not about military developments, but about the daily life in the Netherlands in the time of the Second World War and the movement of resistance against Nazi occupation. It is based on material provided by the Verzetsmuseum, the Museum of Resistance, and the National Committee for 4th and 5th of May, which is a committee that has a key role in organizing the yearly commemoration of the Second World War. Of course, it is not possible to tell the complex story of the whole war in half an hour, but I will try my best to give you an overview of some relevant aspects. To understand what happened in the Netherlands in the years 1940 to 1945, first it is important to know that the Netherlands had not experienced war for many generations. It had been neutral in the First World War and expected to remain neutral also this time. When the Germans invaded in 1940, most people were totally shocked. They did not expect that. The Dutch army fought against the German army for 4 days, but had to surrender after the city of Rotterdam was bombed and the German army threatened to bomb even more cities. The Dutch government and royal family went into exile in England, and the Nazis established a very strict occupation regime, which was stricter than other occupied countries. At first, the occupiers behaved properly. They were hoping to win the Dutch, that they view as part of their Germanic brotherhood, and to win them for National Socialism. There was a National Socialistic movement in the Netherlands itself, a political party that had been set up in 1931, which was modeled after Hitler's National Socialistic Party. After the invasion in May 1940, this party showed their loyalty to the Nazis by holding big parades. From December 1942, the Germans even permitted the leader of this NSB, the political party, Anton Musser, to call himself leader of the Dutch people, although he had no real power. Over the years, the Nazi occupation became stricter, and parliament was dissolved and German laws introduced. Because there was no military rule but a civil government, the existing organization of the state was largely maintained. Dutch civil servants were thus faced with a dilemma. Should they resign or should they continue to do their work? Dutch government had ordered that they should stay on as long as it would be in the interest of the people. But those who did step down were often replaced by Dutchmen with Nazi sympathies, members of this NSB party. Already in the very first days of the occupation, the Nazis introduced censorship on press and radio. Some newspapers that did not comply to the new rules were shut down. Official publications were heavily influenced by German propaganda. This is why many illegal publications were born. In total, 1,300 titles appeared. Some were local, some were national, and they came from different political and religious groups. Some of the papers were typed on a typing machine and stenciled in people's living rooms and only distributed within the neighborhood. But most of the large national illegal newspapers were, towards the end of the war, printed on professional presses. These papers had a large network of people who gathered the news and organized the distribution. Some of the newspapers, such as Het Parool, which translates as the motto, and Trouw, which means loyalty, continue to exist until now. The communist newspaper De Waarheid, the truth, became the official newspaper of the Communist Party after the war, but it was abolished in 1990. Many people were also listening to the radio, to the BBC and Radio Oranje, Radio Orange, which broadcasted news in Dutch from England. Queen Wilhelmina, who was in exile in England, read militant speeches on that channel, and they were very popular. Later in the war, radios were banned as the Germans feared that the radios would be used to transmit instructions in the event of an Allied invasion. Under threat of severe punishment, almost 80% of the radios in the Netherlands were handed in, but thousands of radios disappeared under floors or in the backs of cabinets, and people built simple radios themselves to listen to the radio in secret. And for the people that did not have a radio, the news that was received through the radio was the big source of input for the printed publications. Let me tell you a little bit about the persecution of Jews. The repression of Jews in the Netherlands by the Nazis was a gradual process. the first anti-Jewish regulations seemed rather harmless. In October 1940, all civil servants were required to fill in an ancestry form, which indicated their religion and the religion of their parents and grandparents. Although everyone knew that the purpose was to register Jewish civil servants, the response was still massive compliance. 1 month later, Jewish civil servants were dismissed. In January 1941, all Jews had to report for registration, and again, almost everyone obeyed. But gradually, the Dutch Jews were separated from the rest of the people. Public facilities were closed to Jews. Separate Jewish schools were opened. At the end of April 1942, all Jews were required to wear a Star of David. And in that summer, 1942, the deportations began. Jews were required to report for employment in Germany, as it was said. Many ignored the call-ups, despite the severe threats for not answering. Many were driven from their homes during roundups or raids. Via the Hollandse Schouwburg, which is a theater in Amsterdam, and the Westerbork transit camp, the occupiers deported 107,000 Jews to concentration camps, such as Auschwitz and Sobibor. Only 5,500 of them survived. In total, 78% of the Jewish population of the Netherlands was murdered during the war. To avoid this transfer to Germany, therefore, many Jews decided to go into hiding. 25,000 Jews found a refuge. The best known example of this is Anne Frank, who moved with her family to the Achterhuis, a hidden part of an office building in Amsterdam. But not only Jews, also other people went into hiding. In addition to the 25,000 Jews, there were 325,000 people from other groups. Students who refused the statement of loyalty, former soldiers who did not want to serve in the German army, people that were wanted for resistance activities, and men who refused to report for labor in Germany. Dutch people had been recruited to work in Germany as early as the 30s. At first, only the unemployed and specialized metal workers were forced to work in Germany during the war. But in May 1943, all men between the ages of 18 and 35 had to report for what was called the arbeidsinzet, forced labor. In 1944, this was extended to all men between 16 and 40, and raids were held to pick up all the men on the street. A total of 500,000 Dutchmen ended up working in Germany under diverse conditions. This is 1/3 of all the eligible men. But as I said, many men chose not to go and to go into hiding. In total, there were 350,000 people that went into hiding. It was difficult to find safe hiding places for them because the Netherlands was densely populated and there was a lot of social control. People did not only need a place to physically hide, but they also needed food. Because of the difficult economic situation, already before the war, food was rationed by coupons, and people who were not registered did not receive coupons. In addition, people in hiding also needed forged identity papers and money. Many small groups were formed that organized help for those people in hiding. In 1943, the Landelijke Organisatie was set up, the National Organization, or in full, the National Organization for Aid to Those in Hiding. This organization developed a vast network of regions and districts, and it was one of the largest organizations. Let me tell you a little bit more about the complex organization of this resistance movement. The first organized attempt to resist German occupation was started by Bernard IJzerdraad from the city of Schiedam, next to Rotterdam. Directly following the German occupation, he founded Geuzenverzet, which he named after the Geuzen, the name of the Dutch revolters against the Spanish in the 16th century. Later, many more organizations followed, working on a regional or a national scale, originating in different groups in the society, including student, Christian, and communist organizations. Already early in the war, students in the university cities of Leiden and Delft went on strike to protest against the dismissal of their Jewish teachers. In 1943, authorities made students sign a declaration of loyalty. 86% of the students did not sign. Half of this group went into hiding to escape forced labor in Germany, and many of those joined the movement of resistance. The biggest organized group was, as I mentioned, the National Organization. They started from a religious background. Churches had condemned National Socialism, and during the occupation, they repeatedly sent letters to Seyss-Inquart, the governor of the Nazi occupiers, to protest against the persecution of the Jews and against other measures. There were also protests read out in church by the priests, and many clergymen urged the people in their congregations to help those in hiding. Since the Nazi occupation was well organized and it was a civil administration, the Germans introduced all sorts of official documents to keep the Dutch under control: work exemptions, bicycle permits, identity papers, etc. As a consequence, forged or fake identity papers and other documents were extremely important for both people in hiding and resistance fighters. That is why over time, the resistance organizations set up specialized units to make fake documents. And here on the picture, you see one of those workshops where the work was done. In 1941 and 1942, the first attempts were made to forge identity cards, first in a rather primitive way, just with a knife and pen. But later the techniques used improved slowly but surely. Two workshops called the Central Office for Identity Cards and the Central Office for Forged Documents were set up in 1942 and in 1943. Together, they produced hundreds of thousands of forged documents. The work was even organized so well that they issued catalogs of forged stamps which people could choose from. Another thing that had to be developed was a network of bicycle couriers, especially after a railway strike made train transport impossible. And the telephone also played an important role in maintaining resistance contacts. Technicians of the telephone company set up connections outside the normal telephone network. More and more also armed resistance groups came into being. On March 27th of 1943, an armed resistance group set fire to the Amsterdam Registry Office to prevent false identity cards from being compared to the originals. By August of that year, the national organization started a whole network of armed squads, which were to destroy registry office elsewhere in the country and steal food coupons and blank identity cards. In September of 1944, 3 large armed resistance groups were combined into one sort of parallel army called the Binnenlandse Strijdkrachten, the Interior Forces. Prince Bernhard, the son-in-law of Queen Wilhelmina, who was also in exile in London, was given supreme command. The Interior Forces members were supplied with equipment for the expected struggle for liberation and for sabotage of German transports by means of weapon drops by the Allies. Because of all these activities required a lot of money, young banker Walraven van Hal set up the Nationale Steunfonds, or the National Relief Fund, in 1943. In 1944, he received a guarantee from the Dutch government in London, which made it possible for him to contract large loans with banks and businesses. With help from tax inspectors, he was able to draw on tax revenues. The National Relief Fund made payments to the resistance organizations for a total of 47 million guilders. On several occasions during the war years, there were massive public protests against German occupation in the forms of strikes. I will tell you about 3 of them. First, about the first big strike in the war period. On February 22nd and 23rd of the year 1941, 425 Jewish men were rounded up in Amsterdam, beaten and taken away. This was the first raid. Many Amsterdam residents were shocked. The Dutch Communist Party, which was by then already an illegal party, called for a protest strike on February 25th and 26th. And this strike caught on. More and more businesses started to take part, and the strikers marched through the streets of Amsterdam. And on the second day, the strike spread to towns outside of Amsterdam. The German occupiers were taken by surprise. They abandoned their friendly attitude and reacted very harshly, shooting at groups of strikers. And in March, 3 death sentences were carried out, and the mood among the Dutch population became more embittered. On April 29 of 1943, a completely unexpected announcement was made that 300,000 Dutch soldiers would be transported as prisoners of war. This came as a surprise because in 1940 they had been released. Spontaneous strikes broke out in the eastern region of Twente and spread across the entire country like a fire. Particularly in the countryside, people went on strike. In many places, farmers refused to deliver milk. This strike was also cruelly crushed. And this strike, which is called the milk strike, marks a turning point because by then, all parts of Netherlands had experienced the German terror and support for the resistance organizations increased sharply. And the third strike was in September 1944, when the Dutch government in London called for a railway strike. They wanted the German troop transport to be brought to a standstill because the Allies were planning to carry out airborne landings near Arnhem. The expectation was that liberation would follow within a few weeks. But the airborne landings failed. But the railway strike was a success. 30,000 railway employees went into hiding, and they received financial support from the government in London. Even though the Germans started to use their own trains for transporting troops and transport did not come to a still, the railway strike became a matter of prestige and highly symbolic, and it continued until the liberation. Over the years, the Nazi occupation in the Netherlands kept itself alive through increasing repression. Almost 20,000 Dutch people were arrested because of their work with the resistance. 2,000 of them were executed. Others were sent to detention centers or to concentration camps. German imprisonment was brutal. Solitary confinement, beatings, and malnutrition were part of the daily routine. Several thousand Dutch resistance fighters did not survive their imprisonment. From the summer of 1944, Hitler introduced a real reign of terror. Anyone who was arrested and found with a weapon was to be executed without trial. These people were kept in prison until an act of resistance was carried out, and then they were shot in public. Bystanders were forced to watch. 3,000 Dutch citizens were executed in total during the war. Most of them were resistance fighters. But even innocent citizens were punished and sent to concentration camps as revenge. For instance, the entire male population of the village Putten. In the Netherlands, there were camps for political prisoners in Schorel, Ommen, Vught, and Amersfoort. Amersfoort was mainly a camp for political prisoners, but it was also where the Soviet prisoners of war that are buried now in the Soviet Field of Honor were detained and executed. Remco will tell more about that. This concludes my presentation of today. I am very thankful that the Holocaust Center invited me and developed this program of activities to look at the Second World War from different viewpoints and, more importantly, discuss about it. Because I strongly agree with what Winston Churchill said, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Thank you for your attention. Spasiba za vнимание.
Janet, thank you very much. It was very interesting for us and for our students to learn more about the Netherlands in the Second World War. Thank you very much. And I will give the word to Irina Gridina. She will tell us about what Russian embassy does to save the memory about Soviet soldiers who were executed and died in the Netherlands in the Second World War. Ирина, вам слово.
Спасибо большое, Мария. Good evening to everybody. I'm delighted to welcome the organizers and participants of the conference. We remember them. You know, one of the key areas of work of the Russian embassy in the Netherlands is the careful preservation of the historical memory of the great victory brought to us by the brave soldiers of the Red Army who fought against the German invaders. During the Great Patriotic War, 865 of them gave their lives on the territory of the Netherlands and neighboring countries, including 101 Soviet soldiers who were victims of Nazism in the Nazi concentration camp, Amersfoort. The memorial cemetery in Leusden is the only Soviet military burial ground in the Netherlands. It was opened in 1948. Above each of the 865 graves, there is a plate made of white stone with an engraved name of a deceased soldier on it. On many of them, there is only one inscription, the unknown Soviet soldier. In the center of the memorial stands a 10 meters stele made of white marble. A phased replacement of all the 865 gravestones in the cemetery caused by the necessity to put the new identification data on the buried soldiers, as well as by the Dutch legislation prescribing the replacement of gravestones every 60 years, is planned for the period 2019-2021. The project is jointly financed by the Russian and Dutch authorities, as well as the private funds. In 2019-2020, the Russian side has allocated 200,000 euros for these purposes. The work is carried out by the War Graves Fund of the Netherlands. The first phase of work was completed in 2019, the second in December this year. By this time, 581 tombstones were replaced. The Soviet Field of Honor is of special value for the Russian authorities. The work on ensuring the preservation of the Soviet military graves in the foreign countries and providing proper care for them is one of the most important elements of the Russian Foreign Ministry's foreign policy activities. The work is carried out in cooperation with the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, the other federal agencies, and both historical, political, and humanitarian dimension. One of its priorities is to identify and all the deceased Soviet soldiers, so there were no unmarked graves left. The main goal is no one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten. As it was said by one of a great Russian historian and writer, without knowing the past, it is impossible to understand the true meaning of the present and the goals of the future. The military memorial work of the Russian embassy in the Netherlands is aimed at preserving the historical memory of the great victory and of those because of whom it became possible. This is Russia's sacred duty to all ancestors who lost their lives in the fight against fascism during the Second World War for the peaceful future of their children and grandchildren. We are very grateful for the work made by the Fund Soviet Field of Honor and to the well-known Dutch journalist and our friend Remke Reiting for their work of identifying fallen Soviet soldiers and searching for their living relatives. Every time when it is possible to remove the inscription "Unknown Soviet Soldier" from the tombstone and to replace it with the real name of a person, that is extremely important event for all of us. The new information that was recently discovered by Remke Reiting, I think he will tell about it by himself, is extremely important and significant, as it will allow us to write into history the names of our heroes who remained unknown until this moment. I wish you, Remco, and all the staff of the Fund Soviet Field of Honor every success and all the best.
Thank you very much, Irina. Thank you very much. And now I give the word to Remke Reiting, the hero of this preservation of the names of our soldiers. And we will listen to him, and then students will give a chance to put questions if there will be questions.
Thank you very much, Maria Nikolaevna. I hope there will be questions for Jeanette and for me after I'm done with what I would like to say. Usually I introduce myself also a little bit, but I just wrote down the several names you have given me. The last one was hero, which I feel is a bit strong. But I was called a journalist, a researcher, a friend, and the one I like most was the one Vera Ivanovna proposed, which is a science diplomat. I have to be honest, I never expected to be called a diplomat, but I think I can be proud with such a word you chose, Vera Ivanovna. So I would like to start to thank you all for being present, and I would like to thank, of course, Alexander Borisovich and Maria Nikolaevna, Vera Ivanovna, and all the students that have helped from the Benelux Center to make this happen. I think this is only the start of what could be a very productive and interesting cooperation. I'm also very glad that both embassies are present here today with Jeanette and Irina. They are partners in what we are doing, and we are really glad that, of course, we do a lot of things that are good for a lot of people, but we also feel it's very useful that we have somehow become a bridge between the two countries, and therefore I'm happy to see you here together. That's what I have to say, being the director of the foundation. Now I'm becoming the researcher, if you don't mind. I will take you back to, well, first of all, 1946. Let me see if I can start the presentation. Here we go. Yeah. 1948 was actually the moment the Soviet Field of Honor was opened officially. I'm not sure how good you can see this picture. It's also a very old picture, but you can see that it's still lacking real gravestones. At this moment, there were only really small stones with numbers, and the gravestones that Irina was talking about only appeared later on. But I will tell a bit more about that a little bit later. First of all, this Soviet Field of Honor consists of 865 graves with 865 victims of war. I'm not going into this in detail too much, because also I was given only half an hour, and only about each of those subjects I can talk for hours. So, in short, 101 prisoners of war who died in or around Camp Amersfoort, the concentration camp that was mentioned by Jeanette already. 24 of them died from hunger, illness, and bad treatment in the first months they were in the camp. They arrived on the 27th of September 1941, and unfortunately none of them survived, because the remaining 77 were executed by the German guards in 1942 on the 9th of April. This was the reason why the authorities after the war chose Leusden, as it was called, the village of Leusden, or sometimes it's called Amersfoort, which is the nearest city, was chosen as a place to collect all Soviet soldiers who were buried on the territory of the Netherlands. And they were concentrated on one particular spot in the Netherlands, and that's why we have only one Sovietska Polyeslava, only one Soviet Field of Honor. 609 prisoners of war who died from illness in different places in Germany after being liberated from the camps by the Americans were brought to the Netherlands, were buried on the American battlefields in 1945, and they were reburied in Leusden in 1947-48. And 73 others were brought to the cemetery later on. So nowadays we have a total of 865 victims of war buried on the cemetery. Yeah, well, this is the moment you can use to laugh. This is me more than 20 years ago. This is when I first came to the cemetery, being a young guy. I was told that there are Russian war graves in my hometown of Amersfoort. I had just been to Moscow for the first time in my life. I fell in love with a Russian girl. I was excited about Moscow and the different world you guys are living in. So not that different as it might have seemed in the beginning. And this was the moment that I understood that in my hometown, there is a cemetery with 865 war graves, and all those soldiers have never been identified, and their relatives have never been traced. And that was the start of what I didn't know then would be a life work, because I decided that I wanted to try to identify at least one soldier and find his family, so we could give this forgotten place a face, a story, and a name on the stone. I can talk about this for hours. Maybe if this is very interesting for you all, we can meet up again. I will do it in short now. You should understand that the moment I start searching, I know nothing. I have a stone, and the stone gives a name, and that's it. Usually, of course, a life story starts with where you're born or where you're living. You were called to the army by the Wayenkamat. You are sent to the front. If you were taken prisoner, you could end up in a place called Hemer, and you could die in a place called Ludenscheid, and then you end up in Leusden. This all seems very logical. You leave from the place where you're living, you go to the front, you end up in a camp, and then you're buried on a cemetery. But this was all unknown to me when I started searching. I started at the cemetery having only this. And from there on, I had to move forward, actually, I had to move backwards. I had to understand, how did this soldier, in this case, it says Vladimir Batyenko, how did he end up on the cemetery in Leusden? And to do that, I had to take steps back. I had to understand, where was he brought from? I understood he was brought from the village of Margraten, which is in the south of the Netherlands, and it's where the American military cemetery nowadays is. In Margraten, I searched for documents. This is a document from Margraten. It shows the transfer of bodies of soldiers from Margraten to the Netherlands. In Margraten, I found documents that proved that this soldier, Vladimir Batyenko, actually died in Ludenscheid, as you can see on the second line. Ludenscheid is a city in Germany, and of course I started searching in Ludenscheid, hoping to find more information than only a name. The name mentioned here, again, it's Batyenko Vladimir. Even the letter L is missing in Vladimir. We have only a name and nothing more. But by searching in Ludenscheid, I found documents that gave me more information than we ever had. It said that the Soviet-Russian prisoner of war, Soviet-Russische Kriegsgefangene, Vladimir Batyenko, died on the 25th of May 1945 in Bauclo, which is the hospital in Ludenscheid, was actually born on the 9th of June 1900 in Simferopol. And now suddenly we have a date of birth and a place where to search for him. And even more, it says in German, der Verstorbene war verheiratet mit Alexandra. He was married to Alexandra. So now we had the name of his wife, we had his date of birth, and we had the place where to look for him, Simferopol. I searched further, and then I found this document. This document doesn't only say Krim, Simferopol. Simferopol is on Crimea. It also mentions Slobodka 7, which appeared to be the exact address where Vladimir was living before the war. He built the house with his own hands, Slobodka number 7. So, of course, what did I do in the beginning? This was the first success. It took me 1.5 years to find this. After almost 2 years of searching, I decided to go to Crimea. I wanted to look up the soldier Vladimir Batyenko, and I wanted to trace his family. Because, as you can see in this document, there is actually a soldier called Batyenko Vladimir, who is from Simferopol, and the name of his wife is given here. At 11, you can see the name of his wife. On the first line, it's Alexandra Gerasimovna. And it gives an address on Crimea, not in Simferopol, but in Yalta. So, again, I'm doing this in really short time, so I hope it's still understandable for all of you. I went to Crimea, I went to Simferopol, I went to Yalta, and after searching for a week, we found the family of Vladimir Batyenko, who was indeed missing in action since 1941, when he was called to the army, as you can see on this document. Here at number 8, you can see that he was called to the army in 1941. And there, in Yalta, we found the son of Vladimir Batyenko, Dmitry Batyenko, who had been waiting for news about his father for almost 60 years. And finally, he understood he's never coming back. He's not married to a German woman. He's not somewhere laying dead in the woods. He's actually buried after being a prisoner of war. He's buried in the Netherlands, thousands of kilometers from his hometown, but he does have his own grave. And he showed me the picture of the family, the picture of the soldier. It was the first soldier with a face. This on the left is Vladimir, and on the right is his wife, Alexandra, who was mentioned in the documents. So also this information was actually correct. And on the picture you see 2 of their children. Dmitry was not born yet. They had 4 children, but their other son on the left was still alive, and also he could tell a lot about his father. Of course, the next step was to invite Dmitry to come and visit the grave of his father, the first relative ever to be on the Soviet field of honor. And he, after 60 years, finally had the chance to say goodbye to his father, even though it was kind of a first hello, because Dmitry was only 3 years old when his father kissed him goodbye. This was, of course, very touching for him. Traveled for thousands of kilometers to do such a thing after so many years. And it was very touching for me because it might be difficult to imagine, but I'd been searching for information, I've been searching for the identities of the soldiers, and I've been searching for their relatives for almost 2 years when this happened. So for me, this was also very emotional because instead of sitting in a bar and drinking beer, I was actually working in archives, and to see such a great result, which was very touching, of course, meant also the world to me. I see that I managed to do all this in 11 minutes. I'm really happy with that because I need to tell you a second part of what I was going to tell you today, what I'm supposed to tell you today, which is actually how nowadays do we try to keep the memory of those soldiers alive? Because actually this was a great success, and I thought in the year of 2000, now I'm going back to the daily things I want to do, being a student, studying, working, having fun. But then I realized if you can find one family, why not 5 or 10, or nowadays, 20 years later, 219 soldiers, their families have been traced and informed, and all of them now know that their husband, their father, their grandfather, or their uncle is actually no longer missing in action. He is buried here in the Netherlands. This is what I've been doing for the last 20 years, but in the last 10 years, we've tried to do more because we feel that it's very important for those families to know those stories, but it's very important for all of us. And I'm not going to explain you why. A lot of that was said already by Jeanette and by Irina. But let me just say that what we are doing is not about what happened then, it's about now. Those families are alive now. They need to be informed now. We are trying to keep the memories alive now. So for us, that's a very important part of our motivation. I'm saying we and us. That's because in the year of 2010, we created a foundation, the Fond Sovietske Polislava, Stichting Soviet Ereveld. And by now, probably you have read the goals of our foundation, which is what we've been doing since the beginning: identification of soldiers and trying to trace their relatives, organizing a visit to the grave for those relatives, keeping the memory of those soldiers alive. We do that by a project that I will show you right now. And we're also trying to raise historical awareness because we feel that everyone should be able to judge about what happened then and what's happening now, both in politics and economics and in other spheres. But you can only understand another country if you understand its history. Also, we're trying to reach out to more young people because those are the ones who have the future, and we feel it's very important that they know what happened and what terrible impact war has on millions of people even today. So how do we do that? We are organizing almost every year a visit to the grave for relatives. We are organizing and co-organizing, for example, in cooperation with the Russian embassy, ceremonies on the Soviet Field of Honor and at Monument Kudryst, where those 77 were executed. We organize excursions, lectures, and we're putting flowers and candles near the graves. And now I'm just mentioning the activities that we've done in the last 2-3 years. Yeah, the most touching of what we do is that we reunite relatives with the soldier. Here you see the granddaughter of a soldier who's actually living in Riga nowadays. It took a long time to find his family, almost 20 years. So when she called me and I asked her, which soldier are you talking about? I was even after 20 years, I was in shock, but because I never expected to find her anymore after all I had done. She called me because my name was mentioned in one of the articles that were published during the search. So I didn't find her, but thanks to all the traces I left, she found me, and therefore we were able to reunite them. Many more relatives. You see, we have them in all kinds of shapes and ages and colors. Somehow, apparently, the dress code that day was blue. Yeah, we were surprised to see that even grandchildren are emotionally touched by what happened, because it's their grandparents who lost maybe a grandparent, but this was told in the family generation by generation, and they were missed generation by generation, and therefore they feel it's their obligation to do what their grandparents never could, which is to find out information about their relative and to visit the grave. So even young people who are already third or fourth generation, they are emotionally touched, not just interested, emotionally touched by finding out what happened. One of the most striking things we have introduced is actually, I think, the only ceremony which takes place early in the morning, because we're doing that at 6:30 in the morning when it's still dark. At the time, those 77 were executed just outside of Camp Amersfoort. We are placing candles at the monument, and we have asked a school to participate in this. So each year, new groups from that same school come to place those candles. And it's really special to be together. You woke up, and you woke up early, especially for going to a ceremony, which gives a very different feeling than going to a cemetery at 8 in the evening after a long day at work. And you're standing there in the dark. Often it's pretty cold, it's the 9th of April, and you're standing there together with 100 people, 200 people, sometimes even more, in a forest to remember those soldiers who died such a long time ago. And you can actually feel what they must have felt in a strange country, in the dark, and that makes it really, really special. We are also really glad we started with the 3 of us, that this has become and is welcomed as a ceremony. It became just. It started as as an initiative from a couple of people from our organization, but as you can see, it has now received kind of official participants. You can see the Russian ambassador on the left and the mayors of Leusden and Amersfoort on this picture. For example, I see the ambassador of Belarus, and others have also participated. We wanted it to become touching and not official, not formal. So we have asked a core, I don't know how to pronounce this in English, but you know what I mean, to sing, which makes it really special in the dark, in a forest. So it gives a really good feeling. Another initiative, we've been doing this longer. We are placing flowers on all the graves on the 3rd of May. And we have like 100 volunteers who come and help us. And it's just great to see that what started with an action of 1 or 2 persons now has become part of daily or yearly life, and is people just come and help, and everyone knows what to do, and everyone does it in his own way, and it feels almost like therapy, placing those flowers on those graves. So a lot of people now feel that they can actually do something, which is of course not so easy to find something to do for everyone. Again, also a great way to introduce young people on the cemetery in general and to this particular field of honor which helps us tell the story also to youngsters. Another initiative, it's never ever mentioned anywhere, but I am actually pretty happy with this result. On the 4th of May, we commemorate the dead in World War II. And we do that on the square near the General Cemetery of Amersfoort and Leusden. However, this is done during a silent walk from Camp Amersfoort to the cemetery, but the war graves were never actually visited. So they are there, but we never passed them. And I introduced the idea to first walk past the war graves and then only start the ceremony, because I felt it was wrong that we have 1,350 war graves on the cemetery in total, so not just Soviet soldiers, and we're not actually paying them a tribute on the spot itself. So luckily the authorities agreed with this, even though it's a tight schedule, and that means that every year now 1,500 people pass along the war graves also of the Soviet field of honor. And as you can see here, that means that every year we have 1,500 visitors that never came to the cemetery, and now they do. Something else, Irina knows more about this, of course, because this is the ceremony on the 9th of May, which is organized by the Russian embassy in the Netherlands in cooperation with other embassies. We are also a partner in this organization, and this is also a moment that 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 people gather on the cemetery and remember the victims buried in the Netherlands. Of course, this is also especially a day when Russian people who are living in the Netherlands visit the cemetery, because 9th of May has no meaning to us. We have the 4th and the 5th of May. So, but it's still a good moment where Dutch and Russians meet each other, and it's mixed, and that gives another interesting atmosphere. So, these were just the regular things we do. I still have to tell you a couple of things about the special things we did in the last years. Well, this picture is one of my favorites. I was not in the introduction by anyone mentioned being a researcher on this matter, but I am kind of on this picture also forensic researcher, I suppose. This is me taking a DNA sample from the sister of a soldier called Akaki Tegelitse. This is deep in Georgia in a village. Kitavan, she is called. She was 101 years old when I visited her. And thanks to her DNA, recently we were able to find out for sure that her brother is actually buried on the Soviet field of honor as an unknown soldier. So now we can give his stone a name, and we're hoping for more successes with DNA in the future. Again, you see here, I think it's worth mentioning, these are Dutch employees of the Dutch Ministry of Defense. So you can see that the Dutch government is surely also positively involved in keeping the memory of those soldiers alive, as is the Russian government. Then we have the 24th of December, which is more or less next week. Yeah, next week, exactly. But unfortunately this year we cannot place candles on the cemetery because it's part of an event where usually 3,000 people gather, and due to Corona, COVID-19, it's just impossible to do this. But we started doing this a couple of years ago. We're placing candles on all 865 graves of Soviet soldiers, and actually we're placing them also on the Dutch and the other war graves because we're doing it anyway. So. Well, we're hoping that we will be able to do that next year again, as we do it every year. But this year, our member of board, Ilse Matzer, who was also present, I think, in this presentation somewhere. I don't see you, Ilse, but you're probably here. She will place 8 candles on the cemetery on her own or with her daughter and family, but not with 3,000 people. And why 8 candles? Because we have traced 8 more families this year. And we feel that those 8 soldiers at least deserve a candle just before Christmas. Something very special we organized, but very difficult to explain what made it so special. You just had to be there. Was light. In Dutch it's called licht. We called them, those events, theatrale audio tours, which means something like theatrical audio tours. It was actually, there is no name for this because no one is doing this. It's a combination of different genres. It's theater, it's audio, it's documentary, it's a walk on the cemetery, and all this happening on the cemetery when it's dark. So these are students or schoolers you see from a school here in Amersfoort. They participated all those evenings voluntarily, so that was really great. And here you get an impression of how it looked like. You the participants received headphones, and on these headphones, which made it very intimate, they received the story of a soldier. We had 4 different stories, and they received the whole story of the soldier, which was told on the way to the cemetery, with projections, which was really a great discovery, I think, to do projections in the dark. Here you see me with my son. This was very, we had a small audience because we just couldn't have more people, but it was very successful and very, very interesting. Very good response. Irina has already told you about the renovation of the cemetery. As she said, we have now completed the second phase of the renovation. This is me in Italy. The stones are made in Italy. Actually, the stones are made near Bergamo, which was the epicenter of COVID-19 in Europe in the beginning. So it was very, well, for them, of course, it was terrible, but for us, it was a bit worrying also because we were hoping to get the stones from them. And luckily, they were able to do so in the last months. So the second phase of the renovation was also completed now. That means that those gravestones suddenly now mention not just, as we saw, Batyenko Vladimir with a mistake on it, but you see families, full names, so Familia Imia Otchestva. You see complete dates, so a full date of birth and a full date of decease. Dates were lacking on the stones, and the difference for me is that with the dates and names that are on the stones now, the identity of the soldier is giving back to him, because now he's not just Nikolai Vasilyev, who could be anyone. He is actually Nikolai Petrovich Vasilyev, and he was born on a certain date, and it can be only one soldier and not just any Nikolai Vasilyev. Latest discovery, in Garf, there are documents about the cemetery in the Netherlands, and among those documents are a great discovery, I think. You can read more about this on our website. There are a couple of notes like this one that contain addresses and names of soldiers that are part of the first group, those 101. And those 101 have been buried as unknown soldiers. So till today, we still don't know who they are. And we are hoping to identify them based on this information. We're also very glad with the cooperation by Garf, of course, and by the Dutch Embassy. Really good to see that everyone involved is actually very cooperative and helpful with this important subject. For us, this is like a last dream. We've been hoping for ways to identify also those soldiers, and I don't think we've ever been closer than we are right now. So once again, my last words, because I see that 30 minutes have passed. Once again, I would like to thank everyone who made it possible to be here and to tell you what I just told you. Again, I'm hoping for more cooperation with anyone who wants to cooperate. We really like doing that because we really feel that cooperation makes things better. We can reach things that we couldn't do on our own. And especially I would also like to invite the students that are probably present right now. If you would like to do something for us, or if you would like to come here for an internship, or you have any ideas or any questions, feel free to contact us on this email address that you see right here. And if you haven't written it down, you should do it right now, because I'm going to close the presentation. Okay, thank you again. I'm hoping for a lot of questions for Jeanette, and probably some for me too. So I'm giving the word back to you, Maria.
Yes, Remke, thank you very much. It is, I follow you at Facebook, and I think it's a fantastic work that you do there. And I'm very thankful personally to you and all the people from all the students and pupils of the schools that help you to preserve the names, to do research, and also our embassy and the embassy of the Netherlands, because the war is the thing which touched every family in Russia, my family also. So I think it's fantastic what you do. And we will cooperate. We have spoke about it, and our students are very interested in cooperation with your organization. And there are a lot of students now here. So if there are questions for Remco and for Janet, don't hesitate. And ваши вопросы?
Мария, можно, пока собирают с вопросами, комментарии?
Да.
Can I ask, yes, while the students are thinking about questions, what you've shown is absolutely incredible. What you are doing is incredible. You know, it's so impressive, and it's so touching with these tears. You are really touching the hearts and the souls, and it's important that you're involving, and all your actions are so, I mean, they're so profound and so honest and so sincere. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and I hope that our students will respond and reaching out to involve people. That's what we need to do now, and you managed. Anyway, sorry, but I couldn't resist just saying these words of thanks. Very, very impressive. And now my students have the questions.
Maybe I can use the opportunity to respond to that, because I understand that I'm always in the center of attention, and that's okay. But as you've seen, we've now established an organization, a foundation, and it's not just me. We have a board. We have more than 20 volunteers who help us through the whole year, and we've got hundreds of people helping us out with projects like placing flowers and candles. So it's very important to address the fact that hundreds of people are helping out, and this is a collective result. Of course, it was my initiative, and I still play a big role in it, but it's only thanks to the help of so many other people both all the organizations here present as usual people in the Netherlands and elsewhere, that we can do what we're doing. So I think that's important to mention, because of course it's not just me alone.
Thank you. So, ну что, у кого есть вопросы? Что затаились?
Я бы хотел вопрос задать. Слышно меня?
Да-да-да-да-да.
Да-да.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, Janet and Remco. My name is Dmitry, and I am a first-year student of the Russian State University for the Humanities, and I have the following questions. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the victory over fascism, and the 9th of May in Russia is rightly a victory day. However, the liberal public is increasingly calling for Victory Day to be called a day of mourning. How do you think, is it fair to call Victory Day over fascism a day of mourning?
If you don't mind, I'll respond first. Let me say first that we are not politicians, and what I'm doing is humanitarian work. Secondly, we are the only country in Europe that has 2 different days in a row to remember the war. Let's put it that way. On the 4th of May, we have our day of mourning. On the 5th of May, we have our day of liberation. Personally, I feel that this is convenient, because for me personally, it's very difficult to be extremely sad and extremely happy at the same time. And we have reasons to be extremely sad, and we have reasons to be extremely happy. On the other hand, and that's why I have difficulties with Dien Победы, because it gives half of the story. The name doesn't give those 26 million who died. So I would prefer Dien Победы Getrouw. But that's just my personal view. I've been on tables on the 9th of May in different spots in the former Soviet Union. And whenever vodka gets on the table, and it does on the 9th of May, you see both of those emotions. The sadness of the loss of lost ones, and the happiness of the victory. And I don't think it really matters how you call something, as long as those 2 things are part of the story that is told on those tables. So is that an answer to your question?
And one more question. What can you say about post-war anti-Semitism in the Netherlands? I mean, what was the attitude of the Dutch towards the Jews after the war? And what is the attitude towards them in the Netherlands now? How well does the younger generation of Dutch people know about the Holocaust?
I'm hoping for Jeanette to take that question.
Sorry. Yes, now I'm unmuted. I'm a historian, and I think it's extremely important to keep discussing history. And that is why discussions like this are useful, and it's the same for discussions in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism hasn't disappeared, and that's why we have to keep remembering. I've shown you what happened to the Jews in the Netherlands, and I think looking back at history can be a good start to keep the discussion going. So here as well as in the Netherlands.
Thank you.
I would like to add just a little bit from our perspective. Actually, the fate of the Jews in the Netherlands during World War II is not something that was widely discussed in the first years after the war. It was also only later on that this created, well, it became a well-known story, let's put it that way. And that's also, again, I'm talking from my own perspective right now, that's also why we're hoping that those 26 million who died in the former Soviet Union, who are not part of the usual narrative here in the Netherlands, will be included in the whole story, because it's important to see the war from all perspectives and to see all victims that fell during the war, and not to make this story too narrow. And we're not politicians. I'm not on anyone's side, but that's why I think it's important to tell this story, because it's not told enough, in our opinion, yet in the Netherlands, and not just in the Netherlands.
Thank you. More questions?
I actually have a question. Also, I would like to ask Janet about one thing. So, as far as we know, Belgians had a massive resistance movement, and so why did why have such a great movement? I know that there was some February strike, yes, to begin with, but like the whole the great movement didn't exist in the Netherlands. So why did it happen? So, what's the reason? In the microphone.
Yeah, sorry. I think that is part of how the war developed and how the war took place. And that's a question for military historians. I must say, I'm not a specialist. I cannot say you, but you can send me an email. I can recommend you some reading.
Okay.
More questions?
Yes, I would like also to ask a question. Good evening, everybody. I'm representing the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Brussels. I would like to thank all the organizers and all honorable experts for such an important event. As was underlined in the beginning of the opening of the conference, that in Brussels we also organized this year a dialogue with young people discussing and speaking about 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And my question is, I would like to ask, how do you see in general the perception of the society about the history of Second World War? Unfortunately, we should underline that we see that many young people, they already forget the history of Second World War. General focus of, I would say, political strength is made more on First World War, and this is reasonable because it was also a huge catastrophe for Europe. And also sometimes we see that there are rewritings of history with the strength of the results of the Cold War. So what do you think in general? What is the perception of society? How do they care about what happened, or maybe they already try to forget about this? This is the question. Thank you.
Maybe I can say something about that. You mentioned the Cold War, and the Cold War almost immediately followed the Second World War, and that has led to a divide in perceptions. So there is a war in Western Europe and there's a war in Eastern Europe. And I completely agree with what Remco said, that it's not two wars, it's not two stories, it's one story, it's one event that had serious consequences for the whole continent of Europe. And that is especially why it's important to see all sides of the story, and to have young people, older people, middle-aged people, everyone in between, discuss together to see the many facets and the many stories that together show as a lesson of what we don't want to happen again. So it's not between young and old, I would say. It's to see all sides.
Thanks.
I do feel that the Cold War has been very bad for the Soviet field of honor. It became a forgotten place, in my opinion, for two reasons. One, we had no idea who those soldiers were. They were stones, not human beings. Our relatives had never been traced, so how could we have feelings for that? It was stone, and it was we couldn't identify with the place. Secondly, the Cold War made people not come, because in the worst years of the Cold War, Dutch police officers were standing there writing down names, because if you were putting flowers near Soviet graves, then probably you were a communist. And if you were a communist, you were a danger to the government. So, yeah, in this atmosphere, no one without communist views was going to come, because they were considered to be maybe an enemy. And of course, the combination of those two made it disappear into vergetelheid. Sorry for not having that word in English.
Oblivion.
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe I can add that it's a nice example of the last document that you showed, the address that just came up. It was from a font in the State Archive, from the Trezvyczajna Komisja that investigated war crimes. And these documents were handed over by Dutch authorities to Soviet authorities in 1947, when the Soviet Ereveld was founded and the people from Margraten were reburied. They were given with a purpose to investigate who was there, to investigate the war crimes, maybe to use it as documents in the Nuremberg trials. So there was a start of a cooperation. But then, then the Cold War stopped it, and the documents went into oblivion, and they resurfaced just now because this fund opened recently. So this is the right time to pick up the research on two sides and work further.
Thanks. More questions? Remco, I have a question.
Вы слышите меня?
Да, мы вас слышим.
Простите, я не хотел бы говорить на дурном английском. Лучше я задам вопрос по-русски, тем более здесь русские исследователи. Я написал книгу о нейтральных государствах во Второй мировой войне, и там больше половины посвящено Голландии. И меня интересует вопрос, который я практически нигде не могу узнать. Это мотивация людей, добровольцев и нейтральных стран, которые воевали на Советско-Германском фронте. Мы знаем и героическое сопротивление Голландии, но ведь были и те, которые воевали и пошли добровольно. Причем это же должна быть очень сильная мотивация, ведь ты же на смерть идешь, это не охота с егерями на лис, зайцев и так далее. И я встретил только одну работу немецкого автора, который опрашивал лиц уже осужденных в Голландии, голландских граждан, осужденных за участие в Waffen-СС. И вот мне хотелось спросить, есть ли на этот счет какие-то работы у наших исследователей, у голландцев. Почему? Вот один из создателей иностранных Waffen-СС, генерал Феликс Штайнер, он пишет, что в основном были молодые люди, так сказать, с уголовным прошлым, которые боялись полиции и решили податься вот на войну. Но когда смотришь кадры голландской кинохроники, видно, что очень хорошо одетые мамы, интеллигентные папы провожают хорошо одетых юношей своих на войну. И меня, как русского человека, интересует мотивация. Понимаете, были те, кто клал свою жизнь за Голландию, героически сражался с немцами, а тут вдруг получается такое молодое поколение, выброс, которое идет на охоту. И мне интересно, были ли потом какие-то исследования, в которых эти люди давали объяснение своим поступкам, своей мотивации. Спасибо. Мне это очень интересно, потому что у меня другого повода не будет спросить. Это единственный способ меня спросить. Ну, а как только выйдет книга, я надеюсь вас пригласить на ее презентацию. Она выйдет буквально через 4 месяца.
Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Janet, is het mogelijk of moet ik dat vertalen?
Nee, I understood the question. It's about the motivation of Dutch people who joined the German troops during the war.
Yeah.
I know there were cases. I don't know how many. I don't know why, because I'm not a psychologist, and I'm a historian of the 19th century. I didn't study this period, so I cannot give you an answer. But Mr. Kurkin, you can send me an email. Maria has my address, and then I can help you find someone in the Netherlands who might be able to have a real academic exchange with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add something too. It's also, of course, not my my specialty, but let me say two things. First of all, the 101 Soviet soldiers that were sent here, as far as we can say, as propaganda material. So living propaganda material. The Germans wanted us to see what kind of people, what kind of Untermenschen were living in the East. And they were doing so because they were hoping for our support while fighting in the East, on the Eastern Front. So, of course, they were trying to motivate the Dutch to participate. And part of the motivation, for some, the motivation was that they wanted to fight communism. For others, there were different reasons. I can recommend you at least one book, which is very interesting because it tells the story of those people, not told by someone like you or me, but just from beginning till the end, it's a quote. So it's not someone who edited or made it, corrected things that were wrong. They were just quote from beginning till the end. And it's the book De SS'ers by Armando and Hans Sleutelaar. Of course, it's in Dutch, but again, I can help you by, well, if you send me an email, I will also share this with you, and maybe I can also help you find more people who can add something interesting to this story for you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Janet and Remco. Так что, если вы с нами свяжетесь, вам готовы помочь в поиске контактов, вы можете написать нам на почту benilux@rggu.ru, и мы дальше свяжем вас уже с возможными.
Спасибо большое.
Маша, это мой приятель, поэтому он всегда со мной может связаться.
Да, Александр Николаевич, рада вас видеть. Добрый вечер. Так, ну что, do you have some more questions? Maybe our students have more questions.
Здравствуйте, можно я поприветствую?
Элла, добрый вечер. Элла Георгиевна, президент Ассоциации «Меридиан», Ассоциации соотечественников из Бельгии. Мы очень рады вас видеть, Элла Георгиевна, очень.
Спасибо. Извините, я недостаточно владею английским. Можно я задам вопрос на русском, а потом, наверное, мы тоже свяжемся с Голландией, чтобы выяснить некоторые вопросы, которые нас интересуют.
Здравствуйте, я очень рада встретить коллег из Голландии. Мы тоже уже в течение 10 лет занимаемся сохранением памяти о советских солдатах, захороненных в Бельгии. И в настоящее время мы пишем книгу, которая называется «Советские солдаты в Бельгии», но мы прекрасно знаем, что советские солдаты также воевали в рядах сопротивления Голландии. Если есть какие-то сведения или имена, не могли бы вы нам сообщить об их захоронениях, именно о партизанах, советских партизанах, участниках сопротивления? Это первый вопрос, которые войдут в эту книгу, которая будет выпущена, видимо, в начале января. И второй вопрос, имеете ли вы связь с поисковыми движениями России и Узбекистана, которые уже неоднократно обращались ко мне с вопросом помочь им контактировать с вами и, возможно, найти родственников, которые до сих пор проживают в России или в Узбекистане?
Спасибо, Элла. Is het duidelijk, Remco?
Ja, het eerste misschien nog niet helemaal, maar dat heeft misschien ook iets te maken met dat ik na een hele zware week langzaam maar zeker mijn energie voel leeglopen. Never mind. I'll start with the second. I have contacts.
Remco, kun je in het Russisch spreken?
На русском надо ответить или как?
Да.
Лучше.
Лучше на русском, я понимаю, но есть голландский, который тоже сидит отсюда и ничего не понимает. I will answer in Russian with apologies to those who only speak.
Ik ga dat vertalen, geen probleem, Remco.
Короче, есть очень много контактов в России, в Узбекистане и так далее с поисковиками. Были контакты, есть новые контакты, но всегда рад, если кто-то хочет помочь, получить их данные, чтобы связаться с ними и посмотрим, может быть, они могут что-то делать, которого мы еще не успели делать. Есть контакт в Узбекистане, например, хороший с поисковиками. В России их очень много, конечно. Но, может быть, это новые контакты. Их очень много, поэтому, да, действительно, готов, конечно.
Спасибо.
Первый вопрос, может, не совсем понял. Связано с партизанами?
С партизанами, да. Сопротивление в Голландии, я знаю, что оно было, и на границе с Бельгией шли бои между Голландией и Бельгией. Партизаны участвовали в боях, именно участники сопротивления голландские партизаны и советские партизаны, которые бежали из лагерей. Меня интересует, вот как бы, если вы имеете данные об этих участниках, участники сопротивления.
Ну, таких историй, по-моему, в Голландии были очень мало. И у меня не очень много информации, но я знаю, конечно, что на юге Голландии было очень много, которые работали. И там, конечно, когда убежали, часто они попали где-то в голландском доме. И это, может быть, у них были какие-то акции, саботажи и так далее, но часто, конечно, они просто, конечно, не были на улице, потому что когда ты убежал, и ты бываешь на улице, если тебе поймут, уже как-то уже, конечно, заново попадешь.
Понятно, да. Нас интересуют именно участники сопротивления. Они прятались у голландцев, но они вместе участвовали в освобождении от фашизма. То есть в сентябре шли бои по освобождению Бельгии и Голландии в сентябре 44-го. И нам интересно, если у вас есть списки участников сопротивления, советских солдат, участников сопротивления.
Если не было сопротивления с советскими солдатами, тогда уже не могут быть списки у меня. Вот.
Ну,
вот
понятно.
Может быть, Ремко, ты согласен, что это вопрос для специалистов, для историков милитарных вопросов. Значит, я не могу сказать, но напишите, я могу вам помочь найти контактов в Голландии, которые занимаются с милитарной историей.
Ну, спасибо, Жанетта, тоже, конечно, за помощь. Но я просто хочу сказать, что я уже 22 года ищу информацию о всех, которые бывали в Голландии. И у меня просто почти нет таких историй. Есть какие-то детали, конечно, кто-то делал саботаж, но это не организованное сопротивление советских воинов. Но все равно я готов, конечно, помочь передать данные, но я лично очень хочу знать, что у вас есть в Бельгии, потому что, я так понимаю, в Бельгии была совсем другая ситуация. И
Да.
мне очень интересно знать, что было и как это может быть.
Да. А Родемские мосты, это между Бельгией и Голландией, Родемские мосты? Родемский мост.
Я не знаю.
Вот это совместная операция голландских и бельгийских партизан по освобождению этой части территории между Голландией и Бельгией. Хорошо, мы потом с вами свяжемся и обменяемся.
Да, я думаю, что это не совсем то, чем занимается Ремко, Эл, и лучше списаться, и, может быть, вот Янет, Ремко, может быть, другие контакты найти.
Хорошо.
Потому что это разные концы страны, и трудно знать, что происходило на границе с Бельгией. Для Ремко он в другом территории. Ja, is dat duidelijk, ja, wat ik heb gezegd?
Zeker, maar ik hou me zeker wel bezig met krijgsgevangenen die zijn gevlucht in Nederland zijn beland. Maar als er geen verzetsactiviteiten door zijn ontplooid, dan ja, nogmaals, na 22 jaar heb ik daar geen aanwijzingen voor. Dus je kunt ze gerust doorverwijzen naar anderen. Maar ik ben bang dat die weer bij mij uit gaan komen. Dus van mij mag dat, maar ik zou mij verbazen als dat nieuwe inzichten oplevert na 22.
Ну, мы попробуем. Nog meer vragen, misschien? Misschien nog vragen van studenten? Студенты, куда попрятались? Ремка, ik heb een vraag. I have a question. Remco, ik heb gelezen ook over die adoptie van op die ereveld, over adoptie, adaptation of graves. I think it's very important, but you don't talk about it. Maybe you can say some words about it.
Yeah,
I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much for reminding me. Yeah, there's so much to tell, but it is very important. We 10 years ago understood that we need to do two things. One, find a way that all 806 soldiers are no longer forgotten. And secondly, if we want to be successful in all the things that I've just showed you, we need to find some way of support. Morally, physically, but also financially. So we decided to start a program which means that you can adopt a Soviet soldier buried on the Soviet field of honor. And by adopting this particular soldier, of course, you are remembering this soldier. We are putting flowers at the grave of the adopted soldier. And we have now, and I'm really, really happy with that, we have now 600 soldiers who have been adopted by mostly people in the Netherlands. So those 600 are no longer forgotten. And not sure if Ron is still present. Yeah, he is. He is, for example, one of the people who has adopted the grave. And this really helps us to have the individual stories of all soldiers not forgotten, but it also helps us because we have 600 people who support us, and they support us physically. In the case of Ron, you have to take that very literally because he helped us with cutting the old gravestones that we are parts of that we are keeping because we have plans to open a visitor center in the Netherlands near the cemetery. So that was really tough work that he has done recently for us. But of course, it's also very important that those 600 people help us financially to do what we do, because of course someone has to pay for 865 bouquets of flowers, and someone has to pay for 865 candles, and someone has to pay for the travel of relatives to the Netherlands, etc., etc. And this program helps us to do both. The soldiers are no longer forgotten. There are still 265 soldiers to be adopted. So anyone who is interested and can miss 50 euros a year is very welcome to support our foundation. Thank you for reminding me, Maria.
Thank you very much, Remke. I think it's a very good example, a very good initiative, how we can work together and how people can be involved in preserving the memory of these soldiers. I don't know whether we have such experience in Russia, but it's mainly schools of organizations, but not individuals. So I think it's very important that individuals, Dutch citizens, Dutch people do this for the memory of our soldiers. I think that everybody must know about it. So are there more questions? Of any questions?
Maybe I can ask one question, just because I'm curious.
Ask the students.
Yeah, students. Is there anything in everything that we have said today that you would like to know more about? Is there a subject that we need to tell you more about because you don't know enough about it, or that it's just very interesting to listen to? Is there anything in particular that stands out that is reason to come back here again? If not, that's also fine. Maybe we were just very, very clear and informative. But I'm just, for me, that's interesting feedback.
Maybe I have one question about the Russian students and how Russian students are involved in your funds work. Are there any cases and what they're doing there?
We have help, and we have had support from young people who are living in the Netherlands, and they have Russian roots. So it's not really Russian students at the moment. I've had help from Russian students in the past, I suppose. But for example, we had years in which it was very difficult to get everything we do translated from Dutch to Russian, or letters that had to be written in Russian, or letters that we received that needed to be translated. Of course, I can do all those things myself. I can do most of those things that we do myself, but it's not possible to do all we do just by one person. So we can use help with research. We can use help with translations. We can use help, especially when we have a visitor center, maybe with receiving guests, etc., etc. It's a matter of being creative, and also a matter of thinking for yourself what could be useful. I think, for example, Ilse, our member of board, also present today, is very much focused on education. We have therefore just established a youth council. It might be interesting to have 1 or 2 students from Russia taking part in this youth council.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're open for anything, and all students that are touched by this story and want to do something will find something that works for you and for us. I don't worry.
Thank you a lot.
I'm sorry, I also have one small question. Actually, who provides you with the information? So are you looking for like some data to use in your research on your own, or someone helps you? I mean, maybe some departments or just, you know, embassies or wherever.
this actually developed in the years. In the beginning, I did everything on my own, but I didn't speak Russian, so I needed help in Russia. Then when I visited places to search for families myself, I realized that this works very well, but it's very time consuming and very expensive. So then I gave the last part of the search to, for example, Russian poiskoviki, Russian search groups. So this means that, and I'm still doing this today, I'm searching for the information and I'm doing the analysis, but I'm sending the results of my search and analysis to Russian institutions, which could be ZAKS, it could be Gosarchiv, it could be Administratie Oblasti, it could be Administratie Rajona, it can be UVD, it can be Poiskoviki, it can be SMI, because if the local newspaper publishes about the fact that we're searching for someone, that could also result in families that are traced. So, of course, they are doing then the last step of the search. They are looking on the spot for us, for documents, for people. I'm not traveling to every village in the former Soviet Union myself to find them, because that's just not possible. I would like that, but that's not possible. That's the way we are helped. And this year, for example, I wanted to know exactly what we did. Just to give you an idea, I asked Natalia, who is helping me out with this, how many letters did we send to Russian former Soviet institutions this year? And she answered that we have sent more than 250 different letters. So, of course, we are being helped, but we're doing quite a lot ourselves first before we get help. So it depends also on the subject, but usually if we're talking about searching for information for soldiers and tracing their relatives, we're involving local institutions in our search.
Thank you.
Are there more questions? Good. If there are no questions, I will thank once more Janet for participation in our conference, Remco for participation in our conference, all members, also members of embassies of Russia and the Netherlands, all our guests from Belgium. And I think that we will discuss our cooperation, Remco. We just, I think it will in January, maybe in January, we will meet at Zoom to discuss our cooperation. And then maybe we will make a plan, how shall we work together, and what can our students do to help you in your work?
That sounds great, Maria.
So thank you very much. Hartelijk dank, hartelijk dank. Vandaag praten wij Engels. Helaas niet iedereen spreekt Nederlands, maar misschien dat komt nog. Of anders praten wij Russisch. Goed, thank you very much. Ну все, на этом наша конференция объявляется закрытой. Очень огромное спасибо всем за участие. Надеюсь, это не последняя наша встреча. Нам еще есть о чем поговорить, есть что обсудить. И будем продолжать сотрудничать и продолжать вести наш диалог. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, Мария, большое. Спасибо вам, спасибо, Ренке. Inspirational. Вдохновляющая встреча. Просто на самом деле вот так мы должны строить мосты. Вот это как мы должны налаживать отношения. Спасибо посольству, спасибо, Яна. Просто такое светлое чувство, знаете, объединяющее Голландию, Россию, Бельгию. Это невероятное ощущение. Спасибо, спасибо, Марии, спасибо всем. Ну вот здорово, здорово. So thank you so much. So inspirational, so inspirational. Really, this is incredible.
Спасибо нашим голландским друзьям. Я еще хотел сказать, тем более, что у нас родственные связи. Наш Александр Павлович, государь-император, и был родственником голландской династии, поэтому я считаю Голландия и Россия страны побратимы.
Замечательно.
Ну все, товарищи, всем хорошего вечера, приятных выходных и хорошего настроения в связи с наступающими праздниками.
Вам отдельное спасибо, низкий поклон.
Good evening, everyone.
Как будет Merry Christmas? Как будет?
Kerstmis.
Как?
Zalige kerstdagen.
Zalige kerst. Спасибо.
En een gelukkig nieuwjaar.
Nieuwjaar.
Gelukkig nieuwjaar. Ja.
Ja.
Огромное спасибо, Марина Николаевна. Remco, hartelijk dank. Janette, hartelijk dank.
Graag gedaan, Juri. Tot de volgende keer allemaal. До
До
свидания.
volgende keer. До volgende keer. До свидания.
До свидания. Счастливо.
Спасибо большое, Марина Николаевна. Спасибо.
Goodbye.
Увидимся.
Привет.
Закрываем, Марина Николаевна.